Greetings, Internet. Welcome to the show. So today we're going to be talking about a couple subjects. First one we're going to be talking about is the Library of Noah. So you might be thinking to yourself, Library of Noah, what is he talking about? Well, the flood story is one of the most widespread universal stories known to history. It appears in over 500 different cultures around the world, and it's a universal story. It's found in all these ancient traditions. I couldn't even possibly name some of them all, but there's like a Indian flood. There's like that appears in various Hindu scriptures. There is also flood stories in China. There's a Chinese flood story. There's flood stories. I mean, there's a Babylonian flood story. There's an Akkadian flood story. There is Native American flood stories. There's Aztec flood stories, Mayan flood stories, Incan flood stories. There are Australian flood stories. They're everywhere. Everywhere you look, there's a flood story. So what's interesting is this the Babylonians. I guess Babylonia officially begins. Sumer ends, and Babylonia officially begins with Hammurabi. And so the Babylonians had a flood story, and that was recorded by one of their high priests, Berosus. I might be pronouncing that wrong. Berosus. So here's what he has to say about it. And their flood hero's name is, I'm going to butcher this as well, Xisuthros. Xisutrus. Alright, so here's what Berosus has to say. We're going to go with Berosus. It sounds a little more classy. It was under Xisuthros that the Great Deluge took place, the history of which is told in the sacred documents as follows. Cronus appeared to him in his sleep and announced that on the 15th of the month of Dacios, all men should perish by a flood. He therefore commanded him to take the beginning, the middle, and the end of whatever had been consigned to writing, and to bury it in the city of the sun at Sippara, and then to build a vessel and enter it with his family and dearest friends, to place in the vessel provisions to eat and drink, and to cause animals, birds, and quadrupeds to enter it. Lastly, to prepare everything for navigation. In another section, I don't know if this is a separate book or if it's later in the same book. We have fragments of him in two different books, and there's a second part to this story. I think this is in the same book. So after the flood, he would have them make the best of their way to Babylonia and search for the writings at Sippara, which were to be made known to all mankind, and that the place where they then was the land of Armenia. In this manner they returned to Babylon, and having found the writings at Sippara, they set about building cities and erecting temples, and Babylon was thus inhabited again. Now what's interesting about that is they mention the land of Armenia. Well, that's where these Ararat mountain is located. And the Bible also confirms this. The Bible says that after the deluge, men settled in the land of Shinar, that is Sumer, and they built a city and a tower in Babel. That's Babylon. So this is all parallel to that. But they also have the flood hero burying books and retrieving them afterwards. Now, what's incredibly even more fascinating is the fact that Sumer is known for writing on baked clay tablets. Now, this is a clumsy writing medium. Nobody in the world uses such a clumsy writing medium. They would have these big, like, tablets, these big trays filled with mud, and they would take this reed. It was like this triangular reed, this stylus, and they would write. It kind of looks like almost like Chinese ideograms. Like the writing is similar to that. So it looks similar to that, and it's called cuneiform. And so then they would take those tablets and they would either dry them in the sun or they would bake them in a kiln. And afterwards they'd be rock hard. Now the ones baked in the kiln were a little bit harder than the ones that are dried in the sun. And well, why would you use this? Is well, so the official explanation by scholars for why they used baked clay tablets as a writing medium is because they had a shortage of papyrus. Now, that may be true, but they did a lot of trade, and they did a lot of trade with Egypt, so they could have got papyrus from Egypt had they wanted. But let's say there's, hostile relations between Egypt and Sumer for some reason. Well, there's no other culture, there are cultures that couldn't, Egypt had access to lots of papyrus in the reeds that grew in the Nile. Other countries would use, some countries would peel off bark off of certain soft trees, and they would use this bark. Paper is actually made out of, I believe it's a mulberry tree. They would, they had observed, according to tradition, that comes from China, and they had observed wasps eating the wood of a mulberry tree and then making their paper nests out of it. And they're like, oh, if you, crunch up the bark and wet it and dry it and mash it up, you can get these sheets of paper. And that's where paper comes from. It's actually similar to the word papyrus, but papyrus is actually you strip these reeds off and make these you would paste these strips together and you would get papyrus. So there's a lot of different ways you can get a writing medium. You can either use bark of trees, just peeling soft trees off, soft bark off of trees. You can use reeds and make papyrus. You can grind up wood and make a pulp and get paper. Now, those aren't your only options. You can also, like for instance, in India, cloth was a writing medium. So, well, what more fitting? Like everyone's making cloth for everything. Cloth is used for clothing and for textiles and for curtains and all sorts of things, sails and whatnot. So cloth is an obvious choice. And parchment has also been used. Now parchment, a lot of people don't actually know what that word is, and they think it refers to paper. Parchment refers to leather. So you would have like a hide of a goat or something like that, and you would I think they would smooth it down a little bit, make it a little thinner, or maybe they would get some sheets out of it. I'm not for sure if it was one layer is a page, or if you could get multiple pages out of a skin of a hide. But regardless, parchment has also been used. So you have all these options, and you can't tell me that the Sumerians didn't have cloth, and you can't tell me the Sumerians didn't have leather. So those were two obvious choices you could have had to do that. But if a deluge is coming, if you know that a deluge is coming, you don't want any of those materials. Paper, papyrus, parchment, cloth, all of it is going to get ruined by water. But baked clay tablets are not. Baked clay tablets are like as hard as rocks. They're basically the same as pottery, and pottery is hard. I mean, you're baking earth to a point where it's rock-like. That's why, some of the few things that survive in the fossil record, pottery is one of them. Pottery is basically like finding rocks. Like that's why they find arrowheads. Arrowheads are stones, they're rocks. So it's interesting that you're burying these tablets, or you're burying these books, and then retrieving them after a deluge. And here's the only culture on the planet that uses this clumsy medium that happens to be impervious to water. I'm going to take 2 + 2 and get 4 here. I'm going to say that was intentional. I'm going to say that Noah, or the flood hero, specifically wrote on baked clay tablets, and it just became a tradition after that. Like after they retrieved these books and built this city, it just became a tradition there, and they never stopped doing it. Nowhere else does that. That's why. Those books that were retrieved after the flood were baked clay tablets. Let me know what you think of that theory. That's from yours truly. I read a lot and I make these interesting connections. As I like to say, the more you read, the more puzzle pieces you have to the mystery of history. And the more pieces you put in the puzzle, the easier it is to fill in those tiny little gaps when you have them. And I'm filling in a gap there. I'm going to say that the flood hero invented cuneiform writing. Let me know what you think. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.